In today's show, we answer a simple question. Should Scoot start? Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter, Mike Richmond. You are listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Thanks for making the show your first listen, coming at you each and every weekday, Monday through Friday. So make it a part of your daily routine. Make it your first listen and tell your friends to do the same. It's Locked On Blazers, your team every day. In today's episode, we're going to answer a simple question with a variety of complex answers. Should Scoot start? Seems like a simple enough, straightforward question. This was posed to me by listener Ben from beautiful Portland, Maine. Shout out to Vacation Land. The other Portland as it is known. I'll get into Ben's question, talk about sort of, breaking it down. Should Scoot start? Now that the Blazers situation has changed, should Scoot Henderson start? And then we'll close the show with a preview of Devonte Graham, one of the options if the Blazers do choose to continue to have another point guard because they have an injury at guard, is Devonte Graham, the veteran on a training camp deal, comes to Portland with a chance to make the roster. And if he makes the roster, what would it look like? We'll do a little quick season preview for Devonte Graham to wrap up the show in the third segment. But let's answer this question with an assist from listener Ben. Listener Ben asks, actually, it starts with a statement. I'd love to see the Blazers prioritize developmental minutes and aim to be competitive every night. With respect to being competitive every night, and with Shaedon Sharpe out to start the season, it seems like the consensus is we should minimize the small guys on the court together. We've seen the multiple small non-defensive guard thing fail consistently for the Blazers for a decade and don't need any more data on that. What if the Blazers approach the rotation with a philosophy of minimizing the minutes with multiple small guards of this ilk? I like it. I like the thinking because now with Shaedon Sharpe out for 4 to 6 weeks, he's going to miss a little bit of the season. He's going to miss 4 weeks, miss the first couple weeks of the season, 6 weeks, miss about the first month of the season. If it lingers longer than that, beyond the 6 week timeline, we're talking December, right? We're talking a little bit deeper into the season. So the Blazers have to do something to fill the void left by their presumptive starting shooting guard being out for 20 games or so, 15 plus. And to do that, on yesterday's program, I guessed that Scoot Henderson would likely move into the starting lineup. And so you get a starting lineup of Anthony Simons, Scoot Henderson, alongside Denny Avdia, Jeremy Grant, and DeAndre Ayton. And the Blazers would move forward with that group because, Scoot is just the obvious next guy up. He's not the only option, to be sure, but he's the obvious next guy up. The Blazers are going to split the 3 guard minutes between Simons and Scoot and Shaedon Sharpe anyways, which means you get a little bit of overlap between Scoot and Ant, but you could probably avoid it for the most part unless both guys are humming and you want them on the court to end the game. But for the most part, you could cheese it for the first 40 minutes and not even have to deal with it, right? You could make sure that those guys basically never shared the court. They came in for one another, and you always had size. I will tell you this, just sort of anecdotally talking to folks in the Blazers orbit, they're pretty excited to be bigger. I would say the team is, they've had a lot of Norman Powell and Josh Hart starting at small forward over the years, or 3 guard lineups with Anthony Simons next to Damon CJ, et cetera. And they're they're ready to have some size on the wing. So this isn't lost on the Blazers that having 2 small guards isn't ideal. I still think it's the most likely scenario. We'll talk about that a little more on the show, but is bad. And it was bad last season. And let's talk about how bad it was. I mentioned in yesterday's show that's like, well, it's clearly a pairing that doesn't work well. I didn't give you the specifics. Let me give you the specifics. This is courtesy of Cleaning the Glass. The Blazers offense with Scoot Henderson and Anfernee Simons sharing the floor last year was 108.4 points per 100 possessions, which is in the 14th percentile among lineups across the league, according to Ben Falk's Cleaning the Glass website. 14th percentile. Bad, right? 14 is a low number. Well, it gets worse from there. On defense, they gave up 121.8 points per 100 possessions. That'd be in the first percentile. One of the worst on-court duos in the league. That gives you a comfy net rating of minus 19.7 per 100 possessions. They were outscored with Anfernee Simons and Scoot Henderson sharing the court last year by 19.7 points per 100 possessions. That is in the second percentile, one of the worst differentials in the league. They were not good on offense. They were horrendous on defense, and the result was they were one of the worst pairings in the league. That was across 1,233 possessions, according to Clean the Glass. What are possessions, though? Well, each of them takes about call it about a minute. According to NBA.com, the Clean the Glass filters out some garbage time, so it's not perfect, 1-to-1 with NBA.com, which just gives you the whole stats for the whole year. But you would assume that Scoot and Ant didn't play a ton of garbage minutes together, so it's about the same. According to Clean the Glass, according to NBA.com, Scoot Henderson and Anfernee Simons played 611 minutes together, so about 1,200 possessions or about 600 minutes, depending on how you slice it. That's not a ton. It's not a ton. Over 1,000 would be a ton of minutes, like a duo that played like a lot. And obviously some duos play more than that. 600 isn't a ton of minutes. It's a normal, but it's like a you guys played a lot together type of lineup. And the Blazers were so light on consistent lineups that that's a fairly large amount relative to all of the other pairings that they had last year. But last year was a unique and odd situation for them health-wise, and they just were beat up all the time, all season long. Over those 611 minutes, though, according to NBA.com, the Blazers were outscored by 241 points. Whoa. Hold on. So you're telling me across 600 minutes, they were outscored by 241 points. No duo on the Blazers had a worse plus minus. Raw plus minus for any duo is so noisy, right? That's such a noisy number. It includes three other teammates to make your 5-man group. Like, you can just have, bad luck with some bad shooting. Over 600 minutes, it probably is really susceptible to just the randomness of shot making. But you could also see it with your eyeballs. Neither of those dudes are big. Anfernee Simons is small and a bad defensive player. Scoot Henderson is, point guard size. He's like big, right? Because he's got big shoulders and long arms and huge hands, but he's point guard size. He's small relative to the rest of the NBA players, short relative to the rest of the NBA players on a court. He's always going to be that size. Anfernee Simons always going to be that size. Scoot was a very bad defender as well. His rookie season, it is what it is. Neither of them are likely to ever be plus defenders. Scoot certainly has tools, I think, to be a good defender, right? He might end up being a pretty good playmaker on defense in terms of getting steals, but I think his size will limit his overall positive impact. But there's a world in which he's a good defender. There's not a world in which Ant is a good defender. It's just he's too deep into his career, right? It is what it is. And playing them both together, you're just undersized. And teams are going to pick on you if you're undersized, and being big is valuable in the league. You're just going to need to be bigger to be effective on defense in the NBA. And maybe you can make up for it like the Cavs do with being really big up front and playing two smaller guards and et cetera, et cetera. But it presents a challenge. This duo isn't ideal. The numbers suggest they're not ideal. And as listener Ben points out, we probably don't need any more data on it. And I think to some extent that's correct. I think that's correct, right? We saw the Dame and CJ pairing, and those are two elite offensive players, right? Dame's one of the best offensive players of his generation. CJ McCollum is a dude who's going to score 20 points per game in the league for a decade. These are really good offensive players, certainly better than Scoot Henderson, and both of them are better than the current version of Anfernee Simons, although he could get better. Right, they probably don't need to run it back. And it would be weird if the next iteration of the Blazers, next era of the Blazers was built around two guards, under 6'4" or whatever, playing undersized two guard. It's this again, huh? And I don't think that's the team's vision, quite frankly, right? They like I said, people around the team are excited that they're bigger, right? Having size on the wing was a priority, and they've something that they've had to slowly build towards because of the way roster construction works, particularly when you run the same team back year over year. They made some pretty seismic trades last year. I'm kidding. But it is the Scoot and Ant pairing isn't ideal. I don't think you can avoid it altogether, but as listener Ben points out, you can probably not go in to intentionally play it together, right? You can say, let's avoid it as much as we can until we get to like the 5-minute mark of the fourth quarter, and then we have to make some tough decisions, right? Because maybe those end up being your two best players at some point, or your two most, like, maybe you need the ball handling, you need the playmaking, like, right? Like you can't go out with some other options. But what are the other options? Ben presented some, and I will present some as well in the second segment, because I do think it is within, well, I don't think it's particularly likely. I do think it's within reason to say, like, that's not going to work. Why try it? I think that is a very fair opinion to hold. So what else should they try? What else should they try? If Scoot shouldn't start, if the answer to should Scoot start is no, what else do they do? Let's talk about some options and the ripple effect of those options in the second segment. Join me there, won't ya? First, though, I want to tell you that today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book, and they're also trying to hook it up during NFL season. We're cruising in. I'm recording this after Monday Night Football. You're listening to Tuesday, October 8th show, and we're cruising towards the midpoint of the NFL season. But if you're spending your weekends or your Thursdays or your Mondays watching NFL games and you got a hunch right in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats and view live play-by-play and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets on the FanDuel app. They make it easy for you to be a informed, up-to-the-minute, up-to-a-second bettor. You can make your wagers, live bet your wagers with all the information you could possibly need right there on the same page. The FanDuel app's got it all for you. And right now you're going to get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So if you place your first $5 bet, win or lose, you can get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed to play around with. So go check out FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com. All right. Listener Ben has some options. Listener Ben says the title of this email is The One Small Guy Philosophy. The idea being that the Blazers should only play one small guy at a time. I mentioned in the past, it's just like, I don't think you can play lineups that are competitive with Anfernee Simons who's not the smallest guy on the court. You play him next to Scoot, you run into trouble, as the stats I shared in the first segment indicate that they ran into trouble a bunch. I don't think you can avoid it altogether, right? Like if Shaedon Sharpe is going to miss a month of the season, right? Like if he's going to be out, the season starts October 23rd. Like if he's out until December, right? If this is more like on the far end of the 6-week timeline, like it kind of is what it is. Like they're going to have to play them together a little bit. But the idea is, should Scoot start? And if the answer is no, I think they have a couple options. I think the obvious option is to start Matisse Thybulle. I think he's capable of guarding twos. I think his defensive playmaking would be a complementary asset in that first unit with, along with Jeremy Grant and Denny Avdia on the wings. He's not much of a spacer. He's just kind of a negative on offense like that. That's just kind of his plight. But like, he's not. He gives the Blazers a little bit of size, a little bit of defensive playmaking. Like he's not big, but he plays like a funky style of defense that allows him to be disruptive on defense, even without being large. He's totally comfortable as a 2 guard, as a 2. And you don't, and it gives you, it like maintains your sort of like, hey, every player is at least like their size and bigger. Like Denny Avdia is maybe like even big for a small forward, a unique thing, but like, Jeremy Grant's maybe small for a power forward, so it all evens out, and maybe neither of them are playing a position other than the one that's called forward, so we don't need to parse it too much. But I think Matisse is a totally reasonable option there. It would in this case, and this is regardless of who plays, because at some point, like who starts, at some point, one of Scoot Henderson or Anfernee Simons is going to sit. You're going to need a lot of secondary playmaking from Denny Avdia. That's going to be a big part of Shaedon Sharpe missing time, is that there's not a ton of like ball in your hand decision makers on the Blazers roster. Matisse Thybulle is absolutely not that. Jeremy Grant is he's not suited to be that. You can't really run offense through DeAndre Ayton because he's not much of a dribbler or a passer. So like you kind of need other guys to be like if you're going to, a lot of Blazers offense in the past has been like sort of drive and kick focus type of thing. And like you're going to need guys to be able to drive, to break down defenses, to take advantage. And Denny has to be that, right? Like he's going to get that opportunity regardless, but particularly with Shaedon Sharpe out, it's even more on his plate in terms of doing that. And that is going to be a big deal. And because often during this stretch, they're going to be playing with just Denny and one of the guards and two of the guards together. It's like that responsibility is going to tick up. So one of the options is Matisse Thybulle. I like that just fine. I don't love it because of like, I think having multiple playmakers from multiple spots is really valuable. I think just having you're losing guys who can attack off the bounce. It's not ideal. The other option, and I'm not sure that this solves it, is Toumani Camara starts at like functionally 2. He's really not a 2, right? Like he's more 4 than 2 in terms of like physical build. He's like 6'7"-ish. But he's like, so he's not like a true power forward, but he's not like I think he was recruited in high school as a center. Like he's not a 2. But he can guard 2s in the league. And if you can guard that position, you can probably play that position. And he's like a spacing wing would be his role on offense. Like I think role is more important than positions. And both Toumani and Matisse Thybulle on offense would be spacing wings. These are guys who play off the ball. They don't have a ton of on the ball juice. They're not tasked with making plays off the bounce or being offensive hubs or anything like that. They're going to space the floor. They're going to finish plays. They're going to cut into space, and they're going to two more than Matisse for sure, crash the glass on offense. And on defense, Toumani is a point of attack defender that might give you like a legitimately like good defensive unit with Toumani, Denny, JG, and DeAndre Ayton around Anfernee Simons in the starting group. I have pushed for this in the past, and I'm glad to see it again. It's like play Anfernee Simons next to big wings. This is like the dream that the Blazers could never fulfill with Damian Lillard because they were unwilling or unable, and this is a version of it because of the size with Toumani Camara and his defensive versatility that you could get away with playing like legitimate, decent, neutral to positive defenders at all 4 other positions next to Anfernee Simons, and size at all 4 spots without sacrificing a ton of shooting relative to the team. Like they're still like that group is going to be a bad shooting team. But like the Blazers roster is what it is. They're probably going to be a bad shooting team regardless. And like that would be still one of your best shooting lineups by a mile. It would be adding Toumani into that group, right? Because I think Toumani shot the final 39 games of the regular season last year. He shot north of 37% on just 2 attempts per game, 2.2 attempts per game, I believe, off the top of my head. Like low volume, but certainly a better shooter than in theory. Certainly he was a better shooter the second half of the season than Matisse Thybulle, who really struggled the second half of the season. Matisse was better the first half of the season. Which half would you like to choose from? I guess choose your own adventure there. Same thing with Denny, though. If Toumani's on the court, Denny has to take a lot of ball handling and playmaking responsibility. Like that all has to happen regardless of it working. I think in general, listener Ben from Portland, Maine, vacation land, I think this is fine. Like, I think this is a really reasonable, like, should Scoot start? I think this is like a reasonable case against it. You get a lineup that doesn't sacrifice a lot of shooting. It adds plus defenders around your best offensive player. It might make your most competitive lineup, and it would allow for maybe more positive developmental minutes in that first unit. But regardless of what you do, you're still going to get a weird, like, you're not going to, it is hard under the situation they are with their health, period, to put lineups out there that are like hyper positive Scoot Henderson lineups, right? Because he's going to have to play with if say he's the first sub, 6-minute mark, they take Anfernee Simons out and Scoot gets to play the next 3 minutes roughly, 2.5 to 3 minutes roughly with the starters. That's going to be his best minutes, like when he's playing with his best players. A friend of the program and our fearless leader, David Locke, host of Locked On Jazz, voice of the Utah Jazz, like as pointed out, it's like young players, when you ask them to be the best player on the court, are always going to struggle. Like put them in better context and they'll look better and it's like more positive. Moving Scoot into the second unit, period, is maybe not the best developmental minutes for him, is not the best way to maximize him. But putting him in the starting lineup also is probably not the best developmental minutes for him. I think if you want to get the most out of Scoot, you would just play him with the 4 other best players. You would start him and bench Anthony Simons, but that's not on the table. If Anthony Simons is on the team, he's going to start and he's going to play 30-some minutes, 33 minutes a night. Like, he's just better than the other options. He's certainly better than Scoot Henderson. So I think this is a very noble, reasonable, and like straightforward, very logical idea. And I think in general, we will see at least some of this because that's the nature of the substitutions. But I don't think it perfectly solves it. Not that Ben was suggesting that it perfectly solves it, but I think it's important to note that, like, regardless of what you do, Scoot and Ant are going to have to play a little bit together. And then when you get to the end of the game, you're going to have to make some tough decisions. Does Scoot not finish games? And I think the question that we should be thinking about, maybe as we rephrase this, is the question, should Scoot start, is less important than should Scoot close? Because the Blazers, they're not going to, there's some games where they can get walloped, right? And the end of the game won't matter. But if they are in competitive minutes, I feel like those have some real value. Can you be a functional part of winning time? Can you contribute to positive possessions? And if Scoot can't, like if the answer is no, he can't contribute, it doesn't matter if he starts. It doesn't matter if he comes off the bench. It doesn't matter what context you put him in for the first 40 minutes of the game. If the final 8 minutes are untenable, then the problem is bigger than that, right? So I think the solution is fine. If you want to root for Scoot to come off the bench because you like the solution better, it's fine. I don't think that's the direction they will go, but I think this is like a totally logical, totally reasonable one that solves the first couple substitution patterns okay, and then you get to the end of the game and you're left with bigger questions. But I do think this is a logical place to go. I don't think it's what the Blazers will do because I think like decisions aren't just best. There's egos and franchise investment and all those things. But I think this is a totally logical one. Shout out to listener Ben for the email. If you want to email me, lockdownblazerspod@gmail.com. And shoot, if it's a good enough question like Ben's, I might turn it into 20 minutes of the program. The other option that the Blazers have is just add another straight-up point guard to the roster. What if they keep Devonte Graham? What if he gets the 15th roster spot and some of solving the who plays is just like, okay, they need another point guard. Let's put another guy on the court. Am I advocating for them to get even smaller and add a 6'1 guard to the mix? Probably not, but let's talk about Devonte Graham and what he could conceivably bring to the team, because a solution to not having enough ball-handling guards is to keep another ball-handling guard with some veteran savvy on the roster. Let's talk Devonte to close the show. Join me in that third segment, won't ya? First, though, I want to tell you about Gametime, the place that rewards you for procrastinating. It is a mobile app that makes buying tickets simpler. So whatever simpler means to you, if you want to just see the view from your seat exactly from the arena you're going to be in, they've got that. If you want to find the lowest possible price in a certain section, they've got that with their curation to make it easier to save money on going to sporting events, concerts, and comedy. Or if you just want a no hassle, what you see is what you get pricing, we'll toggle in the all-in pricing, and then when you're browsing, no surprises at checkout. It's exactly what you see on the screen is what you're going to pay. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms apply. Create an account, use the redemption code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Still a pass first point guard. I'm still Mike Richmond, and you are still listening to Locked On Blazers. We're continuing our countdown to tip-off with our preview of every player on the roster, giving you a brief but thorough look at everybody. We'll talk about how they wound up on the Blazers, what they did last season, best and worst case scenarios, and then we'll talk about role and expectations for the season. We've done 14 of these. This is number 15. Number 16 remaining, still out there. Ryan Rupert. We'll probably talk Ryan after he plays preseason game. We get to see a little bit of him. But today we're talking Devonte Graham, a veteran point guard. What could Devonte bring to the squad? Let's talk about it. First of all, Devonte played for the San Antonio Spurs last season. He didn't play that much. Just 23 games and 13.6 minutes per night, average 5.7 0 points, 5 points, 1.6 boards, 2.1 assists, shot 35.2% from the floor, including 30.1% from three and 81.3% from the free throw line. He basically didn't play until the very end of the season. He appeared in just 15 of the first 71 games. Like, he was just out of the rotation. This was a team going younger. It wasn't injuries. It was just straight up a team going younger, trying the Jeremy Sohan thing at point guard. They still had, Tyce Jones. Like they were doing it in the way that they do it. They were the way young teams do, right? Is like, we've got a veteran. We don't need him. And they didn't need him because they chose not to. They were trying developmental minutes. I think I said Tyus Jones, Trey Jones, his brother. But like it's like they weren't even playing Trey Jones, their best point guard, at point guard. They were playing Jeremy Sohan at point guard, and they were just like, Devonte Graham was out of the rotation on purpose on an older team, or on a younger team, as an older player, as a veteran on the team. And then so he finishes out the season. He plays the final 8 games. He gets in the rotation at the very end of the year and plays about 24 minutes a night over the final 8 games and averages 8.1 points, 2 boards, and 3.5 assists. Didn't shoot any better. Like, his efficiency didn't go up. And if you just look at his per 36 numbers over the season, they're some of the worst of his career, the worst since his rookie season. But Devonte Graham has been productive. In the second year in the league, he averaged 18.5 points and was getting MIP votes and got a big contract. And, he's a second round pick who started in Charlotte. And when he got to New Orleans and got that big deal, it never worked out for him. He's spent a couple years in San Antonio. Last season, what I remember from San Antonio is he had a game winner in that weird final weekend game when the Spurs beat the Denver Nuggets in kind of like are the Nuggets serious type of game in the last weekend of the season. And I remember saying to myself, I didn't know Devonte Graham was on the Spurs. That's what I really remember of, is that he hit like a game-winning little like push shot floater, and it was like, I didn't know he was on the Spurs. That's pretty amazing. I can't believe they won that game because I was paying close attention to the Blazers' aggressive tank off. So that's what Devonte did last season. Let's talk best and worst case scenarios. The best case scenario is that he provides a similar role to what he did last year. A guy who is typically out of the rotation, but a veteran presence on a young team, someone who, when called upon, can say, listen, I've been in the league long enough to be helpful. I know what it takes. Behind the scenes, he can share the industry savvy that comes with playing in the league for as long as he has. The knowledge of what it takes to be a pro, to last in the league, to go from second round pick to $60 million contract and all of those things. The best case scenario is that Devonte Graham is exactly what the Blazers need from him, an emergency veteran point guard. The worst case scenario is that he doesn't make the team. I think it's pretty simple. Graham, after he finished up his season with the Spurs had to trade him to actually back to the Hornets, but it was because the Spurs were trading for Harrison Barnes, and they needed roster space and needed to clear the cap space, so they had to attach a pick and send him to Charlotte. Charlotte has actually done a good job this offseason of just being like, send us your tired, you're weak, you're completely neglected veterans in sign-in trades from New York and San Antonio, and give us second-round picks for our troubles. They've absorbed some second-rounders for just being a way station. And Graham goes back to Charlotte, they waive him, and then he enters the free agent market, and the Blazers signed him to an Exhibit 9 deal, a fully non-guaranteed training camp contract. He is competing with Delano Banton, in theory, for the 15th and final roster spot. I think, and I mentioned this on yesterday's show, I think Banton is your guy. Like, he offers positional versatility. He's a little bit younger. He's, the Blazers typically, when they've done business, the guy they give money to first has been the guy that they keep. Graham isn't, like, I think he's a relative long shot to make the team. But if you were going to like try to figure out how do we deal with this or what do we want, there's a chance that the sort of institutional knowledge of someone who's been around the league, they value that because they don't really have, a ton of veteran presence on this roster. But, I guess like, DeAndre Ayton's been in the league for this will be his 7th season. Same with Anthony Simons. Jeremy Grant's north of 30. Duop Reith is 28 years old. Like, they have some older people. Reith obviously entering year 2, not a lot of institutional knowledge. But if they were to value that, that's what Graham brings. And I think he also brings, and I think this is important, is a comfort in being a veteran who does not play. I'm sure he wasn't happy last year not playing. Like, no one wants to watch. And he's like, he's not like 35 or anything. But like, it's not like he's been in the league 15 years and he's just like paying his dues and happy to hold on. It's like, I'm sure he wants to play and sure he thinks that he's, capable of it if given the opportunity. But he spent last year in a role that would be very similar to what the Blazers would ask him to do this year. And I think there is some value there. His best case scenario, I don't think there's a world in which he like leapfrogs into the rotation. Like that's why I didn't say that the best case scenario. And the worst case scenario is not that like, the worst case scenario is he just like doesn't make the team and he enters free agency and he's just like back kind of just like in the wilderness in the way that the final spots on all the rosters are just very, very, very tenuous positions. They, you get a training camp contract, you got to prove it, and you have very little time to do that. I would assume that he doesn't make the team. Like I said, I would assume that they picked Delano Banton, so that's my expectations for him. But and the role again is that sort of veteran role. But I wonder if the sort of calculation is like if they want a true point guard. I think that would be the question. He's more score guard than like true point guard, but he's more point guard than Banton, who's like a scoring wing masquerading as a big point guard. So I wonder if that ends up, that would be the only calculation that would change. If the team like really values, hey, we want like, we're missing like point guard depth. We want that. And I do think they're a little light on guard, although like maybe they view Taze more as that point guard depth. And then that's their two-way guy. So maybe that solves the problem, right? It's like, we have him. We have an emergency point guard and we don't need him. And that's the route they'll go. So I think Graham is unlikely to make the roster. I think he's a long shot. And I think it's somewhat even a misnomer to say that he's competing with Delano Banton for the 15th roster spot. Banton just also happens to have a partially guaranteed deal. So like if they were to waive someone, that's who it would be. But I wonder if I think one of the reasons why Graham would stick around is because the Blazers value something differently. And they're not valuing just like upside and versatility. It's like they value like some sort of soft stuff. What does it mean to have another point guard? What does it mean to have another vet? What does it mean to have that? Like, are there non-basketball-y things? Like, I think like veteran leadership is basketball, right? It's like institutional knowledge shared with youngsters is basketball. Like it's part of the basketball team. I don't know if it's basketball itself, but but the sort of the soft stuff as opposed to the things that we can measure quickly in the box score, the soft value of having veteran guidance. That would be the reason he'd make the roster. That would be the reason. It would be interesting if they do value that indeed. That is going to do it for today's show. That's what we do 5 days a week, Raving Up Podcast, and also on YouTube. I appreciate you listening, and I will talk to you soon.